And good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Hannah. I'm the assistant director at the Blue Hill Library, and I just wanted to welcome you all. Thanks for joining us for another online program. We are very happy to have Philip Osgood here today to help us all hopefully relax a little bit for this presentation about introduction to meditation practice. Philip has been a Buddhist practitioner for 3 decades. He's got experience in a variety of different traditions. He's a meditation practice leader and mentor with the Foundation for Active Compassion and the Natural Dharma Fellowship. And he's going to be sharing some information and some short practices for us to try today. As I said, we'll send out the recording of this, and we're also going to be sending out a resource list with a lot of the things that Philip's going to be mentioning. So no pressure if you're like, names are flying around and you're worried about writing them down or catching them or remembering them. We'll try to capture all of that and send it out in a follow-up email probably tomorrow. And folks are welcome to kind of set your viewpoint however you want for the call. If you want to see just Phil, you should be able to put it on the active speaker view and be seeing him. And if you'd rather be able to kind of see the whole group, you can use the gallery view and have those little Brady Bunch squares. So if you're on a computer, that's usually in the upper right corner. You can change the view. If you're on a mobile device, it may be something you can do by swiping on a phone, or there's usually another little button to switch the view on an iPad. So if you're having questions about that or any other technical difficulties, feel free to use the chat function to send a quick message to me and I can try to help you out with that. But for now, I will hand it over to Phil to get us started.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Hannah and the Blue Hill Library for asking me to do a presentation on meditation. I'm always happy to talk about and share meditation. I think it's very apropos to our contemporary world and what we've all been going through. Seems like the entire country, if not world, is quite stressed out over lots and lots of things: environment, politics, of course, the virus. There's just a lot going on. So we'll talk about some of the applications that meditation can offer us here in the contemporary world. I live in Brooksville with my wife Lydia most of the time. We also spend a bit of time down in Portland. I'm actually in Portland at the moment. And as Hannah mentioned, I'm a practice leader with 2 Tibetan Buddhist organizations. And again, most of the names and organizations and teachers and books that I'm going to mention will be included in an email with resources. So the 2 organizations are the Foundation for Active Compassion and the Natural Dharma Fellowship, which are led by 2 Americans. John McCransky leads the Foundation for Active Compassion. William Miller is the founder of the Natural Dharma Fellowship. And they've studied for decades and decades with deep immersion in Tibetan Buddhist meditation practices. And also I'm a co-leader of the Brooksville Thursday meditation group, which meets every Thursday from 6 to 7 p.m. And all of you are welcome to join that. And I'll be sharing my email address with you. And if you would like any information about that Zoom meditation group, please let me know. And we'll be working with some of the practices that we'll be talking about this afternoon. So yeah, I started way back when. I'm going to be 71 in about a month or so. So I'm a child of the 60s, as some of you are, I expect. And I started reading books on meditation and Zen Buddhism back in the 60s. And I was initiated into transcendental meditation. Some of you may have heard about that. The Beatles were, all into transcendental meditation, TM. I was initiated and practiced that for a while. But my main background is in and with Buddhist practices. I've been involved with the three main schools of Buddhism and Buddhist practice that's come to the West, and they go under the rubrics of Vipassana, Zen, and Tibetan Buddhism. And I'll send a little bit of information on them and the resources. But I also have a deep respect for other contemplative traditions, meditation traditions. For example, the Christian traditions in contemplative Catholicism and contemplatives like Thomas Merton, whom some of you may have heard of or read, and the Greek Orthodox traditions, the Desert Fathers. They have deep contemplative meditation traditions. I also have deep respect for Islamic traditions, especially the Sufi traditions, Sufism. Rumi is a well-known poet, Sufi poet and mystic that some of you may have heard of. I don't know too much about the traditions in Judaism, mainly Kabbalah, but of course there are some, and there's some in every deep tradition. So I'm hoping that this presentation will encourage you to encourage your interest in meditation and help be a spur to do inquiry and look into practice on your own. Because there's so many ranges of opportunities for us today through Zoom and the internet. I was talking briefly with Hannah. I'll give some local resources. There's the Morgan Bay Zendo. They do Zoom meditation practices weekly. And after we're through with COVID, I'm sure they'll open up again. You can visit the Morgan Bay Zendo in Surrey and meditate with them. And again, when we're through with the COVID, our weekly group will meet in person in Brooksville at the Reversing Falls Sanctuary. But we have the wide world today, and it's just amazing the opportunities we have. So I hope this presentation encourages your interest. And please ask questions, just maybe indicate through a raised hand or a chat to Hannah anytime during the presentation. So it's just not me being the talking head here. And we will do a couple brief sessions during the afternoon just to dip into the waters, because otherwise it's kind of like talking about food without actually getting to taste any food. So, and also if there is interest, we could follow up perhaps through the library in a series of meditation practices on a weekly basis and explore some of these meditation techniques more in depth. So I'm just curious if you could just show by raising hands if you have had some meditation experience before. Okay, good, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, and as I mentioned, I find meditation more and more applicable for facing and integrating with our contemporary challenges. So we're going to look at two main approaches. I've kind of parsed this out. Two main approaches to meditation. Mentioned meditation or mindfulness, and what is it? And it seems like a bit amorphous. So try and bring that down to earth, so to speak. So there's the mindfulness-based practices. Probably just about everyone has heard that term, mindfulness. It's been really popularized over the last decade or so. I also like the word awareness a lot, but mindfulness is very commonly used now. And mindfulness has a more kind of secular context to it. And there have been a lot of teachers have kind of pulled the qualities of meditation out from any spiritual or religious trappings and secularized it as a field of very applicable practices. and there are teachers like John Kabat-Zinn. I'll mention him in the resources. He's done a lot of work bringing mindfulness into medical applications. There's hospitals that do courses in mindfulness, and mindfulness makes meditation very accessible for people who do not want to, are not interested in Buddhism or spirituality in general. And it has more of a physiological and a psychological framework. Mindfulness can be very helpful for stress reduction. And also it's used in therapeutic applications. Mindfulness is used in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. There's quite a few psychotherapists who recommend mindfulness type practices to their clients. And there's a lot of medical applications, for example, dealing with chronic pain. John Kabat-Zinn has done a lot of work with that. And again, a lot of hospitals are exploring mindfulness-based applications to pain control. And then, so there's the mindfulness based practices. And then there's what I like to call the wisdom and compassion based practices. And that's more, that's where Buddhism comes in, and the Buddhism, the wisdom and compassion based practices are what I am especially interested in. Although mindfulness, of course, is part of that, but Buddhist practices adds the context of wisdom and compassion based practices as well. So there's more of a spiritual context. And it's not, so through compassion, through the development of compassion, we're not focused just on our own individual path. Mindfulness tends to be a little bit more self-oriented in dealing with one situation, one's wanting to inquire into just learning how to calm down, calm abiding, tranquility, attention, those types of things. But in the wisdom compassion practices, it's quite a bit wider than that. It also deals with how we relate with people. Compassion is an interactive phenomenon. So we're learning through the wisdom and compassion practices as offered in Buddhism, we're learning how to access the quality of compassion, but not just for ourselves, but for developing empathy and compassion for others, and unlocking the power of compassion as a deeply healing force in society, within ourselves, within our field of people that we relate with, within the world in general, developing a more compassionate attitude towards our world. And it's also, compassion can be a force for spiritual and social activism. For example, love and compassion those qualities were really embodied by Martin Luther King Jr., figures like John Lewis, Mahatma Gandhi. They were all deep contemplatives, deeply spiritual practitioners, as well as activists, and also deeply involved with compassion. Martin Luther King Jr. was not just fighting for the civil rights of African Americans, but he also worked in such a way that he was upholding the dignity of his oppressors. And John Lewis has talked about that he was protesting to uphold the dignity not only of his fellow African Americans and fellow Americans, but also for those who were actually oppressing him. So compassion can be a deep force for dealing directly with the humanity of us all. And also, compassion practice has real world applications. It can be very helpful for people working in the social services, psychologists, healthcare workers, social workers. Compassion as a meditation form can assuage compassion fatigue and empathic distress. And so people that are in the trenches find compassion practices very, very meaningful to help them deal with their work without becoming burned out. So there's a deep dimension to these compassion practices. So wanted to delve into mindfulness a little bit. So there's a concept called beginner's mind in Zen Buddhism, in which when we approach meditation, always to the best that we can, taking the attitude of being a beginner, a very childlike attitude, a fresh approach to the present moment and being in the present. So I kind of took that when I was starting to prepare for this presentation. So what is mindfulness? Not just assuming I know it or anyone knows it. So I got a couple definitions, just Googling around a little bit, that were kind of interesting. So this is from the Mayo Clinic. So from a hospital setting where they use mindfulness. Mindfulness is a type of meditation in which you focus on being aware of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment without interpretation or judgment. Practicing mindfulness involves breathing methods, guided imagery, and other practices to relax the mind and body and help reduce stress. So that's a little bit of a kind of a utilitarian, but I think very good definition of mindfulness. This is from John Kabat-Zinn's website, mindfulness.org. Mindfulness is the basic human ability to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we're doing, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. While mindfulness is something we all naturally possess, it's more readily available to us when we practice on a daily basis. And I like that because they're mentioning that this is a quality, mindfulness is a quality that we all naturally possess, but that can become overshadowed by the thinking mind, by worldly stresses, by effort, trying, judgment, all that stuff that we can so easily become entrapped by in our daily life and in dealing with the challenges of contemporary life. So why don't we take a brief break and we'll do a mindfulness practice right now. So if you would take a nice restful posture in your chair, seat, and if you would like to, you can go ahead and close your eyes. And just rest your awareness on your body, on whatever bodily sensations are arising. Simply becoming aware of the body's contact with your chair or seat back. Simply feeling the connection of body to seat, back, hands, legs. Simply relaxing into awareness of the body. Feeling the connection of your body to seat, to the earth. So in a sense, you're being upheld by the earth through your physical contact. Allowing awareness to rest on the breath. Simply resting awareness on the inhalation, the exhalation, the life-giving energy of the breath. If you find yourself distracted by thought, that's fine. Just gently, if it feels natural to you, resting awareness again on the breath. Notice the thinking mind pulling you away. When you notice that, simply resting awareness again on the breath. And then resting awareness on what you're feeling, emotions, feelings. Becoming mindful if there's a sense of self-identification, I, me, mine. Simply becoming aware and mindful of just being a human being, a person experiencing what you feel. And then, if you can, simply being mindful, spaciously mindful of whatever arises, bodily sensations, the breath, thoughts, feelings, reactions. If there are judgments arising, just simply allowing them to be there. And then dropping any sense of effort around meditating. You can allow your eyes to gently open. Coming back to awareness, the here and now. It's coming back to the group. So that was that was a real kind of nutshell practice. But it can be simple like that, and it can be short as well, or it can be much longer. So are there any questions or particular reactions to that very, very short meditation practice, mindfulness practice? Susan?
Didn't feel short,
Uh,
but it felt very, very relaxing.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there can be a shift in perspective of time. Yeah. I mean, it can often feel more spacious. Yeah.
Thank you.
Philip, what about thoughts?
Okay. Yes.
I've
So-
read something about, monkeys in the trees, and you try to focus and you have all these thoughts going on.
Yes.
The lawn has to be done, the groceries, all that stuff. What do you do?
That's very common. That's very, very common. And this is, we just did I don't know how long that was. It was, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, maybe a tiny bit more. So we are thinking creatures, and one of the goal is not to try and achieve no thought. That would be hard to do, but we can become not as pushed around by thoughts, let's put it that way. But it's very common in the initial phases of any meditation, of mindful meditation, any meditation, when you start to quiet the mind. And a lot of this is about listening. We're starting to listen and be present to what's happening in the present moment. And there's a lot. There's always quite a bit going on, the more we tune into it. And so in the beginning, and this can last for a bit, it'll seem like there's actually more thought, because we're unaware, we're unmindful of the way our monkey minds operate, that we're constantly being pushed around. So what one does in mindfulness in the beginning phases is to become more aware of that and give a sense of spaciousness, so that the thinking mind can relax and let go a bit and open up. Because for so much of the time we're thinking, well, we have to control things, we have to do this, have to do that. And we do have to do a lot of things. We're living in complex times. But so we're kind of going against the grain in a way with mindfulness in the beginning, of taking a time out from that and allowing that to be. And one of the hardest things, and it was mentioned in a couple of those quotes I read from the Mayo Clinic, aware of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment without interpretation or judgment. So simply developing this muscle of mindfulness to be aware of the thoughts arising and allow them to unwind. Some meditation teachers use the analogy of it's like you're trying to to calm a wild horse, like the thinking mind's a wild horse. So you catch a wild horse, put it in a corral, and it's just going to go nuts for a while until it starts to just blow off steam and relax and let go. So one of the things we do with mindfulness practice is basically do that, give the thinking mind space. And we're learning about it. I mean, we're starting to learn about how we all operate, how our thinking mind operates.
Mhm.
And becoming less at effect with it, less affected and pushed around by all those thoughts, and being kind to them, which is where compassion can start, being compassionate for this one here and what we're all going through.
We had a couple questions in the chat, Philip.
Okay.
Someone asked how long a practice should new meditators start with?
Okay. Well, I would try for, say, 15 minutes at a time. And again, if you start Googling, looking at some of the resources, there are many, many, many mindfulness guided practices on the internet. I mean, when I was cutting my teeth, in my early 20s with Vipassana, we would be given, rest awareness on the breath, mindfulness of breath, and we would sit for an hour, cross-legged for an hour, and then have a break and then do it again. And that's very, very arduous. And we don't have to, there's no reason we have to do that. So I would say about 15 minutes, and then seeing if you can expand that. If it becomes uncomfortable, then stop. I mean, it really is, attention and mindfulness are like a muscle, and that one builds, and you do it through practice. That's why it's called meditation practice. And it is good if one is interested to try and do it on a daily-ish basis.
And then another question, is guided meditation as effective as meditating on your own? They say, I find it is helpful to have someone interrupt and remind me not to chase my thoughts, but should I be just trying to meditate on my own?
Well, I would try both. And it can be hard it's a steeper learning curve doing it on your own. And I, again, when I was younger, when we were all younger, and starting to do these types of practices in the US, we would simply be given instruction, like in Zen, that will say, just sit. And then you have to figure it out on your own, and that's tough. So guided practices can be very helpful for helping to build that muscle of attention. Because what happens is we don't have to, you can relax. It's not like you don't want to go to sleep and you're not giving over control or anything, but yeah, you're having someone just point out. It's like we're thinking, we're breathing, we have bodily sensations going on, all at the same time. But what we're doing is slowing down. So like, for example, when I said, become aware of your body, then you can just settle on the body. Become aware of the breath, rest your awareness on your breath. Well, we're breathing all the time, but you just develop mindful breath. I would experience both. Of course, the aim really is to be able to meditate on your own, and often during the day, when you're in the line at Tradewinds or at the co-op, you can just drop in, and slow down. The key to meditation is how to integrate this into our lives. We're not yogis off in caves. We're lay people living in contemporary life.
And then Connie asked the group, did anyone else have an attack of yawns? This almost comically interfered with my effort. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Philip, if anyone wants to wave if they had that experience too.
Yeah, and of course that's dangerous. Yawns, now hearing the word yawn, I want to yawn. So that happens. Yeah, it's kind of like we're becoming conscious to what's going on all the time, really. And when you if you do develop a capacity to sit for like half an hour. It's almost like watching a movie screen, what of the mind, of, memories, thoughts, reactions, emotions. Oh, I want to do this, and blah, 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 and oh, I got to do this. So what we're developing is the capacity to kind of step back and be an attentive, a mindful witness of who and what we are.
Mhm.
And any other questions at this point? Okay. So let me move on a bit to the compassion and wisdom side, because again, I think this is where the power of meditation comes in for me. And not to denigrate mindfulness practice. I mean, that is a rich practice in and of itself, and there are lots of benefits. But these ideas will come mainly from the Buddhist tradition, from the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. But of course, compassion and wisdom are deep qualities within all the major spiritual and religious traditions. But my experience is mainly in some of the Asian traditions. And I do think, and take my viewpoint with a grain of salt, that ironically the East, which before till recently was very behind the West and technology and things like that, but on the spiritual level and the meditation level has been working with these practices for thousands of years. Tibet's a very primitive place still today, but their meditation practices have a depth psychology, which I find quite amazing. But that's my bias. So the wisdom aspect of meditation is exploring things like exploring who and what we are through meditation. What is the nature of the self, of this self we identify with and have given a name and a life stream and everything? So it can involve inquiry into the nature of the self, the nature of who we are in meditation. And I actually brought that in a tiny bit in our very brief meditation when, looking at the self. Is there a sense of I, me, with our thoughts? And there almost always is. I don't know if you can have a thought without an I or a sense of self. And so the wisdom aspects of meditation involves inquiring into that. And what is consciousness? What is awareness? How are we able to be, as far as we know, we're the only animal that is truly self-reflective. We're more self-reflective than other species. And what is mind? And also an important issue in Buddhism, what is suffering? What is this ease that we often find in our lives? Especially, to put it simply, when we want things to be other than the way they are, which from the Buddhist perspective is a type of suffering or discord. How does that come about? What is that? And then of course that will come up in our meditations around our thoughts. Even though the advice is to not judge our thoughts. It's hard not to do that because we tend to be judgmental creatures, which is, and being compassionate and kind to ourselves about that. So there's that kind of wisdom aspect in Tibetan Buddhism and in Zen. And then there's compassion. What is compassion? So I kind of went into beginner's mind again and looked up just some definitions of what is compassion. So this is from the dictionary, but actually I think it's pretty good. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines compassion as the sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. Compassion is the sympathetic consciousness or awareness of other people's distress or suffering, together with a desire to alleviate it. And John McCransky, one of the teachers I've worked with a lot, he's written a book called Awakening Through Love, Unveiling Your Deep Inner Goodness, which I would recommend if you are interested in compassion practices. John defines compassion as a form of love that is willing to be with the suffering of self or others while wishing ourselves and others freedom from their suffering. So actually similar to that dictionary definition. So compassion is a form of love that is willing to be with the suffering of self and others while wishing them freedom from their suffering, from our suffering. And one of the precursors or prerequisites of compassion is empathy. And one definition of empathy from just looking online is our feeling of awareness toward others, people's emotions, and attempt to understand how they feel. So empathy is our feeling of awareness towards other people's emotions and an attempt to understand how they feel, putting ourselves in other people's shoes. And compassion then is an emotional response to empathy and creates a desire to help. So empathy and compassion are seen from a meditative or the Buddhist perspective as intertwined. And one of the ways that we develop empathy through meditation is becoming aware of our own feelings and what it's like to be a person feeling these feelings. And by becoming more aware of our own feelings and also the understanding, kind of the wisdom understanding that just as we feel, so many others feel, it's almost natural for a sense of empathy, of understanding how other people feel through our willingness to feel what we feel. And just as we wish to be free of our uncomfortable feelings, this wish arises, a wish and aspiration for the freedom of others with their discords through our empathetic understanding of what they're going through. And so the realm of wisdom and compassion practices are ways of evoking that. So from the Buddhist perspective, and I would argue from the Christian perspective, that compassion is seen as an innate quality of who and what we are. It just is. Through meditation, when we get to know the essence of who and what we are, there's almost a natural awareness and mindfulness that develops that compassion is an innate quality of who and what we are. It's just an innate fabric of being a human being. I'll just state that it's easier said than experienced perhaps, but hopefully we all have at least a slight sense of that. And we can learn to develop this quality. So again, from the Buddhist perspective, this is an innate quality of who and what we are. It's a fabric of who we are, but we may be out of touch of living and coming from that quality. But we can learn to develop that quality through compassion practices. And one of the places we start is that we come through meditation. We can come through meditation to rediscover how we've been held in compassion throughout our lives. That in fact we wouldn't have been able to survive without being held in compassion. And that can be hard. That was hard for me to get initially, and I know it has been hard for other people. When a Tibetan Lama, when a Tibetan teacher starts to teach compassion practices, and they start with evoking unconditional love. And so a Tibetan teacher would say, like, well, just think of your mother. I mean, obviously, your mother expressed unconditional love to you. So she's a model to you of unconditional love and compassion. And, you know, they came to Western audiences. For many of us, it was like, I don't think so. You know, if you had loving parents, you know, great. I didn't feel like I experienced a lot of love and compassion in my upbringing. I mean, I've reawoken to it, but I wouldn't say love and compassion were voiced in my family. The word love wasn't used very much. So for some of us, it's been hard to reconnect with it. And so these practices are a ways and means to evoke those qualities within us and explore whether these are a foundational innate quality of who and what we are. And if it is innate within us, is it not innate in all other beings? So it's a little bit different than mindfulness, which can be applied just for one's own development, so to say. But the direction and wisdom and compassion practices is very much about our interrelationship with ourselves, holding ourselves in compassion, receiving compassion, and also as a way of interrelating with other beings in compassionate presence. And then it starts to have incredibly powerful applications. And again, I would submit that this is what empowered people like Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, and other people, that the Dalai Lama, other people that may come to mind for you, Mother Teresa, people who seem to really get it and are just really grounded in compassion. So through these practices, we can learn to become more and more grounded in these qualities. So these compassion practices are also a very kind of involve a heroic stance and attitude, because it's actually, as we were talking about before, it's a form of love that is willing to be with the suffering of oneself and others, while wishing oneself and others to be free of suffering. So in a way, these practices involve getting in touch with our own deep feelings in a way that's safe, where they can be held with compassion and love and wisdom and mindfulness. And this sounds theoretical, I know, but this is where the transformational power of meditation applies to what, for example, we've all been going through in this horrible last year. The stress, the anger, the angst, the sorrow. I mean, we've all been through so much. I mean, always in life there's this stuff, but it's just been accentuated, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. So these types of practices give us a safe way to feel what we're feeling with compassion and love, so that some of these feelings can release and hold, and we can experience our basic goodness with a sense of refuge, with these qualities of compassion and wisdom and mindfulness. and it has a very healing aspect to it. And also, not that, we have a lot of work to do. We have to change the climate, there's a lot of work to do. But can we interact the world? This is where the rubber meets the road with meditation. Can we interact with the world with mindfulness, with presence, with care, with compassion, and with wisdom? So this is where the deep dimensions of meditation lead. And I know this is a lot to dive into, but this is where these practices go. And you don't have to, it's fine to just stay with mindfulness and relaxing, but I would feel remiss if we didn't cover these, at least entertain these dimensions. So we'll do a practice, but I just want to open up to questions or comments. This is kind of like a big download if you haven't been introduced to this type of thinking or approach.
I'm just curious that you haven't mentioned Taoism. Is that just a little explanation actually where do you think it fits in what you've been telling us so far?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Taoism, but Taoism mixed with Buddhism. Buddhism went to China and mixed with Taoism, and the resulting form was Zen Buddhism.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just a quickie response.
Yeah.
Are practices for compassion different from practices for wisdom?
They're connected. So there's a Tibetan Buddhist imagery that wisdom and compassion are like two wings of the dove, that they enhance each other. So wisdom is the kind of the insight of exploring who and what we are. So that's kind of like I was talking around compassion. So that's kind of the wisdom side. And, you have to take with a grain of salt, perhaps, whether this is really true, that compassion is an innate quality of who and what we are. That's the wisdom perspective. And compassion enhances wisdom of being grounded in this innate quality of care, of kindness, can help our minds, so to speak, open up to wisdom of who and what we are, of how to apply compassion in real life, how to do that. Because it's complicated. You look at people again like Martin Luther King Jr. If you listen to John Lewis, he was a really deep guy. Mahatma Gandhi, they were informed by spirituality, compassion, love, and the way they worked was through wise activism. So that they're totally intertwined. So thank you for that question. Yeah. Any other questions or reactions at this point?
Philip, I do have a question. I've read a little bit of Thomas Keating's works. Thomas Keating is a monk from Trappist Cistercian,
Yep.
and he also talks about healing. Is that also part of the mindfulness and the awareness?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, mindfulness in and of itself is healing. There seems to be a healing quality just to awareness and mindfulness. And that's where, John Kabat-Zinn and various medical practitioners are working with the healing aspect, just a mindfulness, just kind of peeled away just by itself. But compassion has a hugely healing quality to it.
Okay.
of with our relationships, with how we engage in this wild and tumultuous world. I had the honor and pleasure of meeting Father Thomas Keating, and I'll just put his name in there to Google. He was very influenced by Buddhist practice,
Mhm.
and he developed a form of Christian contemplative practice called the centering prayer.
Mhm.
And so that would be something to look into if one wants to go more from a Christian perspective. Yeah, Father Thomas Keating, centering prayer. Yeah, he was a Trappist monk, passed away recently, but yeah, really a wonderful man. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else at this point? Okay, so we'll do a compassion practice, and please be gentle with yourselves with this, because again, this is like a muscle that can sometimes really need to be developed. It may or may not be accessible for everyone right away. I hope it is, but please don't be thrown off if it's not immediately accessible. It's a practice. I mean, I've been doing this for quite a while, and it's, it's still growing and deepening. It's, in a way, it's kind of anyway, these practices, if one wants to enter the road of meditation, it can be a lifelong practice, or it can be something that one just dips into, or, just spends a few minutes a day. And again, there's all kinds of wonderful books out there. I'll present a few, or just name authors, and you can Google them at your leisure and see if any of these books appeal to you. So before we do this practice, or what we'll do is I'm going to ask us all to recollect caring moments in our life. And these can be, and you can start to think of some, and it's okay to have a bunch of them or just one. So these are moments in our life that can be relative, that that are points of access to the qualities of love, kindness, and compassion. It can be at times when, if we were fortunate with our parents, when we were held with love. And again, these are caring moments, so that people don't have to be perfect. But in this moment, if even just for a moment, they were there for us. They sensed our inner goodness and upheld it for us. So they can be times when a friend was there to listen to us, when someone put their arm around our shoulders. It can be when being with a baby opened our heart. It can be a moment of communion with a pet, the love of a dog or a cat. It can be a sunset. It can be a poem. There are certain poems that evoke qualities of love and compassion for me. Music, it's whatever. By just recollecting it, calling it to mind, we're tapping into the qualities of love and compassion. By calling them to mind, what's actually going on is these moments are like little rays of compassion. But where they're coming from is that kind of limitless, unconditional love and compassion expressed through a relative moment in our lives. And you can also call to mind what some teachers like John McCransky and Willa Miller call benefactors, people, teachers who are really inspirational or influential to us, mentors, relatives. It can be a figure like Martin Luther King or the Dalai Lama or Christ. Can be the Virgin Mary. It can be any figure, archetypical or real in our life, that by calling that occasion or that person, that figure to mind, helps us access the quality of compassion here and now. There also can be moments like, of course, there's not as many now perhaps because we're in isolation, but times, I mean, when you're in a restaurant and a waiter or waitress is just extends a little bit of kindness, goes, just tiny step out of their way, are you having a good time? Where they're really in that moment interested in your well-being, or a cashier at Tradewinds or the co-op or whatever. Those relative moments too, just, in those moments, like even coming from strangers, people you don't even know, where you just, those moments of connection. And, by learning this type of practice is, you just open up, there's just so many of them. At first, there may not seem to be any or few, but through the development of this type of practice, we learn to access them. So rest in a comfortable posture in your chair. Your eyes can be open or closed. Just gently allowing our awareness to open, feeling the body here in the seat. The breath relaxed and open. To the degree it feels natural for you, allowing your heart and mind to be open and receptive to what arises. And calling to mind a caring moment when you were held in kindness, love, compassion. When someone was there for you. When you felt seen or heard. A moment in nature when your heart was stirred. Love of a child, a pet, or your love for a child or pet. That love that opened your heart to being receptive, to compassion. Trusting that feeling of compassion as real, calling to mind teachers, exemplars of compassion like the Dalai Lama or Christ, the presence of God, figures like Martin Luther King Jr., opening heart and mind to being receptive of this sense of compassionate warmth. Seeing if you can feel that presence in your body. Your breath, as if you're breathing in the quality of compassion. To the degree that it feels natural, allowing your heart and mind to open. Whatever thoughts are arising, simply allowing them to be held with compassion. The sense of self, this one here, to be embraced and cradled by the quality of compassion. Simply exploring what it feels like to be held in compassion. Simply being with this one here, but this one here is thinking and feeling. Allowing all those thoughts and feelings to be held in compassionate embrace. And then dissolving any sense of effort or trying. Simply letting go of any effort. Being mindful to whatever arises in this present moment. Gently allowing your eyes to open. Returning to the group here. So how was that? Any questions or comments or reactions?
That was very lovely.
Mhm.
And I look forward to incorporating more of that awareness of compassion in my regular meditation. I have a mantra, but I don't see that the mantra would interfere with that.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, really nothing would, nothing would interfere with this. I mean, unless, we just have reactions against it or something, but yeah, I mean, it's really just tapping into something that's innate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Thank you.
Sure. Connie?
Yeah. I have a kind of sort of offbeat experience, perhaps because my parents were atheists. I'm an atheist, and have grown up concluding that any of the religions of Abraham and other, even the Buddhists who behave very badly in Myanmar, that they've caused more evil than good. But so in fact, the word compassion doesn't work for me. My experience is one of gratitude. My experience is one of being connected to the fungus and the air and the sunset and the baby and my dying husband and all of it. It's an experience of not even imagining that I can cross the bridge to someone else's feeling, but rather start from a point of being connected, like Robin Wall Kimmerer, that the earth is an organism, that the timeline of the growth of a tree and all that. So that's where I dwell. And I have a single experience, which cannot be called wisdom or compassion, but just gratitude. I float on a sea of gratitude, astonished by consciousness, and that's enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. That's great. Gratitude, I'm going to talk from a Buddhist perspective a tiny bit, but gratitude, I mean, there's a whole field of gratitude that really meditations that emphasize gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
It's I mean, it's a transcendental virtue. And I will just say, I know a lot of atheists. I'm basically an atheist myself, that that don't have problem, that are able to access the quality of compassion. I mean, I would submit that it can be unpacked from religious traditions, and no religious tradition has like a trademark on compassion, let's say, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure, thank you. Any other?
Philip, hi. I typed something in, but you probably didn't see it, so I'll just talk about it. And that is, I'm a little, not confused, but I'd like more explanation of what I perceive to be the tension between meditation as something that's inwardly focused, and then meditation that's outwardly focused. I mean, is that a reality?
Mhm.
That you see that there's some kind of push and pull there?
Well, yeah, I would say they're just kind of different poles, and there's nothing wrong with either. I mean, I would say mindfulness practice tends to be a little bit more inwardly focused, and that's totally fine. And there's actually schools of Buddhism, like the Vipassana approach generally, and the Theravadan, the original form of Buddhism is more inward focused. And and then later developments are more, compassion and outward focus. So, they're just kind of different parts of the spectrum, and they're both great, and people should follow what they're called to do. But yeah, it's a good observation. Yes. Did that help?
Well, maybe. I mean, in a nutshell, how would you define the goal of meditation?
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. It's not very easily answered. If one starts on the Buddhist path, it's actually to be enlightened, whatever that might mean, enlightened or awakened, or to have a transcendental experience. But mindfulness can be just the goal could be stress reduction, calm. It could be to, in certain cases, alleviate depression or anxiety. So there can be utilitarian goals. And then there can be the goal to alleviate suffering in general. And or it could be to, find out what there is. Is this all there is? I mean, when I was young, it was a combination of both. I was pretty unhappy, around 20. And so there was a fair amount of suffering, but I also was I had an inquiry about what is this thing, Buddhism, and what are they all talking about? And, is there something there? What is that all about? And so it was kind of both things. So I think the question, for everyone to ask, if you're interested, is, what is your goal? What are you looking for? And that may change along the way. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you, Philip. That was great.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I really appreciate you being here and guiding everyone through that and providing all this great information.
Sure. So there will be a follow-up email, and please feel free to contact me if you'd like to. And again, there are some local resources. The Morgan Bay Zendo, there's our group in Brooksville on Thursdays. But also with the internet and Zoom, the world is our oyster, so to speak. And there's, of course, lots of great books out there. So I really hope that this has been an encouragement to delve into this vast area.
I found it very rewarding and very informative and just a lovely hour to spend. Thank you very much.